Thank you. Good morning, everybody. Hope I am audible and you can also see the slide that we are already presenting. First of all, a warm welcome to all our participants and all the people who have registered, and definitely to our speakers today who've joined us to share a lot of information which is going to be useful. I'm going to just take another 3-4 minutes to talk about the agenda. The session is definitely, as the topic has suggested, and you all have registered, we are definitely going to be talking about the Microsoft service on WVD, which is the Windows Virtual Desktop session. Once we're done with the introduction, and I'd like to talk about the team, the experts who are going to talk about in the session, which is targeted to be done in 30 to 40 minutes, and which post which we do intend to take up questions towards the end. However, if you have any questions, there is a tab for you to post them as we go along so that we make sure we cover most or all the questions that we may have. So before I introduce the team to all of you lovely attendees this morning, I'd just like to say that, of course, this is a joint webinar between Microsoft and Aspire Next. I'd like to also introduce Aspire Next. We're basically a digital transformation company with a lot of system integration capabilities, professional services, and we operate both in Singapore and Malaysia. And we've got a full-fledged team for sales, pre-sales, delivery, and much more. Some of the areas that we focus within Aspire Next in Southeast Asia is on helping customers get onto the cloud journey, help them leverage the true power of cloud and extending that all the way to big data analytics, AI, ML, the entire stack. And also a lot of work we've done is around application development and modernization. But without going into too much detail about what we do, we definitely want to introduce the team, which is going to be on the panel, and also are your experts today to talk about the solution. However, if any of you may want to contact us for any other technical discussion, or you'd like to know more about how Aspire Next can help you based on all the work we've done in Southeast Asia, please drop either a note on the chat window, or there are contact details at the end of the presentation. We'll be very happy to get in touch with you and be able to support you in your digital journey. The last point from my side is you will get a copy of these slides and the recording of the session. So no need to take too many notes. But having said that, I do want to give a warm welcome, Timothy, to yourself. Thank you so much for making time. And for people who don't know Timothy is a part of the Microsoft organization, and he's been very instrumental and supportive both to Aspire Next in making sure that our customers get the right value from the Microsoft brand perspective and the services solutions that they bring to the table. And then we, of course, have Mark. Mark is a part of Aspire Next, and he's our lead technical solution architect for cloud and has helped several customers to get onto the cloud journey. So warm welcome to Timothy and Mark. And with that, Timothy, I'd like to invite you to take the first part of the webinar, please. Thank you.
Am I audible?
Yes, now it's part, Timothy. Thanks.
Great. All right. Thank you so much. Really glad to be here on the webinar with everyone today. Thank you everyone for joining. So I'm a partner specialist at Microsoft Singapore, and I focus on Azure. And maybe just to do a quick apologies to everyone, because it seems like my neighbor has just started doing some renovation works. So I guess that's the challenge of working from home, eh? So apologies for that if it comes on. So our experience working with Aspire Next so far it's been really awesome, really great. They are a really capable partner, very responsive to our customers. And they're not just supporting us to help our customers with their Windows virtual desktop requirements. They are also capable of handling like Citrix on Azure as well as VMware Horizon on Azure. So we rely on them a lot for quite a number of our opportunities. So on the presentation proper, right? The whole intent for me today is actually not to touch too much on the technical details, because I'll be leaving that to our very capable partner and our next speaker basically for this. And what I hope to cover is really about what the service is about. How do you think of it going forward, and really what are customers trying to achieve when they leverage this service. So on the next slide, basically in today's context, it's no hidden secret that that IT really encounters several challenges that helps employees to stay productive and to have business continue as usual, right? Whether that's on the case of enabling remote work, whether that's on resolving any sort of scaling or capacity issues that you have with your existing virtual desktop infrastructure solutions that are on-prem, or if you're brand new to the virtualization space, the challenge would be to stay within budget and be able to deploy the solution with the limited resources that we have. And of course, very important, especially now, is to always be able to address all sorts of security and compliance requirements. So on the next slide, virtualization itself is not new, and it really helps to achieve specific business needs. So whether you are trying to go for a business transformation in the sense of providing secure remote access to your staff, and it allows you to achieve a very cost optimized solutions for these sort of needs, and really just to leverage on the newer technologies of today where we can provide a desktop as a service. The whole context of why this happens is it's really nicely put by our Microsoft CEO Satya, who once said that we saw 2 years worth of digital transformation happening in a span of 2 months, and that really gave rise to this whole notion of a hybrid workforce where everyone is trying to work from anywhere, to have that business continuity on demand. And there's a real need to get set up and in production within weeks. So this service, this WVD service itself is pretty new. It went GA last year, and I would say that it's really timely, that it was launched, and we've seen an incredible uptake on this service to achieve all these sort of needs that I've just spoke about, right? And the service itself is a fully managed platform. So you can think of it as a PaaS solution, where it helps to really simplify a lot of your IT operations. And I'm sure Mark will give you a better idea of that as we go on to the next segment. So the last thing to leave you with on this slide is really about how the solution cuts across all sorts of scenarios, and it's not really specific for particular industries. So we've seen customers who have approached us to sort of implement WVD or really relook their virtualization scenarios, whether they be from supply chain or manufacturing, or even from the FSI space. So on the next slide, just to summarize what you can achieve, or what's in it for our customers, right? I would say we can bucket it into 3 different pillars. So from an infrastructure perspective, you would be able to have more cost efficiencies in your compute, your storage, and your network requirements, which is the usual case with the cloud, because of a pay-as-you-go model where you are paying for exactly what you're using. You can shut down VMs to save costs easily, as opposed to on-premises. And really just to avoid any upfront costs or capex, capital expenses, right? And align the business to a more friendly OpEx model where cash flow is better managed, and achieve the same level of cost efficiency by leveraging the Windows 10 multi-session, where you can have multiple users on one VM. All of that would be seen in a really cool demo that Mark has later. On the licensing front, the requirements for licensing on Windows Virtual Desktop is a little bit different than traditional, than what we are all used to, I guess. And I'll cover that in depth later. From a total cost of ownership perspective, as I mentioned, this is a managed platform. So gone are all those, the game changer here is really on this portion where a lot of the traditional infrastructure that had to be in place for a VDI solution, right, on premises goes away. All of that is managed by Microsoft. And it really makes management and ongoing operations a lot easier overall. So you're not just saving on the infrastructure costs, but you're also reducing the overheads on staff, and shaving off some of that responsibility so that they can work on other more business impactful activities. So the next slide is just a really cool customer story that I wanted to share with everyone. This is actually a US customer, and what we helped them to achieve was basically Corona City was we worked with one of their officials, right, in Corona City, and it's a US government customer. So they had to deal with very sensitive and confidential data, and together with Microsoft and Citrix, we were able to provide them that sort of assurance by helping them to stay compliant with the criminal justice information systems compliance and the Department of Justice regulations. So starting with Microsoft infrastructure, we provided the platform to push their existing investments on premises over to Azure, and over a 3-year period, they have already shifted about 80% of their machines, and it really dramatically reduced the expense of their hardware by 72%, as you can see on the slide. Using the joint technologies from Citrix and Microsoft, they were able to, we were able to provide them a very secure desktop image and not trading off the great experience because of the Windows 10 OS that is available to their end users, and also providing them an overall cost saving of over 50%. So as I said earlier, next slide. So the service itself is generally available worldwide, and you can leverage on the Windows 10 multi-session experience, and it has been fully optimized for Office 365. So Outlook and OneDrive works as per usual. We've even made it really simple to migrate some of your existing investments on RDS, for example, from your desktops and applications over to the cloud, and you can really deploy and scale the service in a matter of minutes as opposed to weeks. Next slide. So just to share how far we have come, right? In terms of the service itself, there have been several key releases that I think are quite pertinent to share. So you can see on the slide, but what I would like to highlight is really on the monitoring piece that's not there, where if IT has a requirement to manage and monitor the ongoing performance and user experience, that has been really simplified and made simple by using a native service called Azure Monitor, where you don't actually have to deploy any VMs for that. It's really just a plug and play sort of service that you can set up really quickly. And Teams integration is also something that I wanted to point out. And we've optimized the service to provide an audio-visual redirection, so that your whole experience of using Teams through a Windows Virtual Desktop on the cloud, right, is as seamless as if it was on a local machine. So on the next slide. This is the licensing portion that I was covering. So generally speaking, for Wvd, the license is actually more of a per user requirement. So whether you are deploying Windows 10 or Windows 7 on a client side or Windows Server on a server side, what you really need to take care of is making sure that your users are licensed with any one of these appropriate skills. You can definitely work with Aspirenex so that they can help you to figure out, what makes the most sense, what is most cost effective, economical for you. But you really don't need to license in the traditional sense the actual OS itself. And the requirement here is to only license your users on a per user basis, right? So to go on the next slide for pricing, what you pay for at the end of the day is really on the VMs itself, the compute, the storage, and the networking. That's what you're paying for. The management plane that Microsoft provides is not something you're paying for, and it's fully managed by Microsoft. So because ultimately your virtual desktops are on a VM, you have the flexibility to choose any size and any type you want, depending on your use case. We have seen customers who have taken up, GPU-based VMs on Azure for their graphic intensive requirements, such as running Autodesk Revit, AutoCAD, or even SolidWorks. To further reduce and optimize the cost, you can opt for go for the Azure reserved instance, which can reduce your running costs of up to 72%. Next slide. Thanks, Mark. So the second last slide I wanted to really leave you with is that whole notion of the partnership we have with Citrix and VMware, and what Aspire-NX is also able to provide, right? The management plane that I spoke of, you can see that Microsoft provides it here in the center there, and all your VMs and desktops and applications are on the right. So that is what you're paying for at the end. And customers do have a choice to choose between whether they need a Citrix management plane or a VMware. It doesn't really matter to us. And usually that comes into the play when you have really specific requirements and key features and value add that only Citrix and VMware are able to provide on top of the WVD service. So the multi-session image itself is provided to our partners, Citrix and VMware, and they are also available through the management planes. So really, it's just about customer choice in this case. So the last slide I wanted to leave you with are a host of resources if you would like to learn more about the WVD service. Azure Academy is more of a technical sense to get an understanding of how the service can be set up and how it works. Microsoft Mechanics is a really fun overview of the overall service itself, and the rest are really just for more learning and understanding on the WVD service. So with that, I thank you all for listening in on my section here and your kind attention, even though I can't see you. So right now, what I'll do is to pass the time over to Mark, who will take it off on the next session. Thank you.
Thank you, Timothy. Hi, everyone. Good morning. Thanks for joining us today for this webinar on WVD, right? So what I'm going to cover is a little more on how customers can utilize WVD to transform their VDI infrastructure, right? So let's take a step back and go back in time, and let's first ask the real question: what is WVD, right? So WVD is a really comprehensive desktop and virtualization service on Azure, right? And it's the only cloud service to actually provide a multi-session Windows 10 experience to their customers. Now, keeping this in mind, this multi-session Windows 10 experience, they also have optimizations for their O365 apps. Being a Microsoft product, Microsoft is continuously working on optimizing their applications for WVD. Now, a really good example of this is Teams. So how Teams normally works is Teams sets up a connection between your client, that's your laptop, and the Teams backend infrastructure, and then that infrastructure sends your audio and video back to the person you're trying to connect to. But on WVD, Microsoft has enabled a client-to-client connection, thus skipping the whole hops between the data centers of Azure, the different regions in Azure, and then finally to your client desktop that you're trying to connect to. So this has really transformed the way Teams is utilized on WVD, giving it a more seamless experience for their customers, right? Now, if you look at how traditional VDI infrastructure is set up, you have your servers, you have your storage, you have your connection broker, you have user data, you have your AD, you have a lot of client systems, you have power and cooling for your data center. Now, how VDI is uncomplicated by Microsoft is that Microsoft takes on all the management of the backend infrastructure, right? So your compute, storage, networking, your connection brokers, your load balancers, your gateway, diagnostics, web access clients, all of these are taken care of and managed by Azure. Well, whereas you as a customer just has to manage your subscription, right? So anyone with an Azure subscription is entitled to spin up a WVD infrastructure on Azure, keeping in mind the licensing, obviously, right? So an IT team in an organization would just have to manage the images that they put into Azure, while Azure manages the infrastructure that's needed to run your WVD infrastructure, which I will show you in our deployment demo. Right. So a little bit on the deployment models on WVD. Considering WVD is a VDI service, a lot of people would traditionally think that you would need a single VM per user, right? So that's your traditional deployment method where a single VM is assigned to a user, and every time a user logs in, he is persistently sent to the same VM because his user data is in that VM. Right now, with technology like Fslogix, which is a company that Microsoft has recently acquired and then stitched into their whole WVD service, they have enabled a multi-session Windows environment, right? And how they do this is through something called a host pool. A host pool is basically a connection of backend infrastructures. That's all your virtual machines running your WVD service in the backend, right? So you could go ahead and segregate your host pools depending on your department, right? So like Timothy was saying, you see a lot of customers going for GPU intensive VMs in the backend. That's because their creative department, who will be running CAD and Photoshop and Illustrator, would need those GPU intensive VMs in the backend to run their applications. And this can be separated depending on the application group that you assign to the user, right? So like Timothy was saying, it's more of a user-based segregation than a VM-based segregation now. So your users are assigned to a particular VM, and the next time they log in, they don't have to be assigned to the same VM. They can be sent to a different VM and they won't have any issues, right? So how this happens is through a technology called Fslogix. So Fslogix is a technology that helps you separate user data from the operating system. So if you look at a traditional system, you have your user profile, that's your user data. You have your operating system on top of which your user data sits, and you have applications on top of your operating system that you've installed, right? So what Fslogix does is Fslogix actually separates the user data from the operating system by creating something called a profile container, right? This profile container can go ahead and be stored on blob storage or on either a file system of your choosing. And every time a user logs in, Azure automatically hydrates that user data into the VM the user is logging in a matter of seconds, right? So this profile container is available as a .vhd file, but the way Azure does it is it attaches to the local C disk, right? And users are given the same seamless experience that they would expect to have from their hardware that they are using, from the laptop they're using, or from a client system that they are using on premise, right? Now, a little bit on app attach. App attach is a new technology that has come out into WVD, even though it is not yet in general availability. I would like to cover a little bit on it. App attach is a little similar to Fslogix in a way, but it helps you segregate your applications from your operating system, right? So what happens is you have your applications that are stitched into the operating system because they rely on various registry values. They rely on user data coming from the user profile. App attach actually lets IT administrators go ahead and provision applications to users. And when the user logs in, this application is automatically attached as a disk, right? So when the application is attached as a disk, it appears to be as a local application on the system, giving the user again that same seamless experience he would expect from running the application on his local C drive, right? So like Timothy covered in his presentation, cost optimization with Azure WVD, right? If you look at the expenses to run a traditional VDI infrastructure on premise, now say it's not a huge VDI infrastructure, say it's something small, you just require 2 physical servers, a little storage, maybe 8 TB of usable storage, right? So now if you say 8 TB of usable storage and I'm taking RAID 10 into consideration, that's procuring 16 TB of raw storage, which is quite a expensive forte if you look at it. So keeping that in mind, and keeping in mind the fact that Azure manages the compute, storage, and network needed for a customer to run their WVD infrastructure, you can see the cost savings over 5 years, right? Now, if you look at this, if you look at the presentation, the cost needed to run your data center is 27% of the cost, the total cost in your annual expenditure on your infrastructure, right? So that 27% is removed and it is 0%, including your networking. So your switching, routing, everything is now 0% for your WVD infrastructure. That includes your load balancer, your connection brokers, which require its own VMs to run in, or sometimes even specific technologies needed to actually run those connection brokers on an infrastructure. If you look at the compute, I've taken into consideration a very small compute case over here where it's just a 2-processor 4-core server, right? So that makes up for 55% of the compute cost. Now, making that type of capital expenditure into a return on investment is quite an ordeal, because you might see that this resource is not fully utilized by the number of users you have. On Azure, you can go ahead and scale up and scale down automatically, right? So you have Azure automation that takes care of the whole automated scaling up and scaling down depending on the load. And you have different load balancing methods based on cost optimization and based on performance, which I will further explain in the demo. That helps you actually save cost and helps you automate the deployment of your VMs. You're shutting down the VMs and you're starting your VMs. Right. So now talk about a little bit about WVD security. I have my security practice lead from Aspirenext, Mr. Shahid Kanji. He'll be just taking you through a little bit on the WVD security front.
Yeah, thank you, Mark. Hi, everyone. As introduced by Mark, I'm Shahid, and I lead the security vertical for Aspirenext. And today I'll throw some light on the security controls that are available for WVD. So I'll talk briefly on 3 major verticals of security for WVD, which is network, identity, and host. But before we go to them, let me give you an overview of the current security scenario. Next slide. Considering the expanded threat landscape, security is a boundaryless domain, right? And it's not merely about controls now. It's a shared responsibility among all the involved parties, including the end users per se. So talking about WVD, which is Windows Virtual Desktop, it leverages the security capabilities that are natively available on Azure to protect the involved organization assets. But it has some built-in advanced security features as well, which I'll throw some light on later. So cloud-based WVD is a cloud-based service, and obviously cloud-based services are different from traditional on-premises VDIs, since it handles security responsibilities different as any other cloud-based service, right? For example, in a traditional on-premises VDI, the customer would be responsible for all aspects of security, including physical security. However, in most of the cloud services, as we know, these responsibilities are shared between the customer and the cloud provider, in this case, which is Microsoft. So it's important to understand that in WVD, while some components come already secured, it is required to configure other areas to fit the organization's security needs. Now, the security needs the customer is not responsible for are handled by Microsoft, obviously, and the ones customer is responsible for are handled either by solution providers like us, which is Aspirenext, or by the customers directly themselves, or it can be shared between the solution providers and the customers. Depends. So let me start with WVD network security on the next slide. Some controls under this vertical are network security groups, Azure Firewall, reverse connect, and network security groups are essentially the first layer of security to filter L3 traffic. That is all it is. But obviously, it's a first layer of security, and it's equally important. So with respect to Azure Firewall, it can be used to protect the WVD with the help of FUDN tags. The firewall is going to act as a security hub, which means the traffic can be controlled to other destinations, either on-prem or within Azure, or to WVD from the internet. This means that anything trying to access the Wvd service needs to pass through this Azure Firewall in order to be able to connect to internal resources like domain controllers, file shares, or Fslogix profiles, which is very important, and so on. So this Azure Firewall will also allow us to do some monitoring, tracking, and threat analytics based on how it is configured and what other services are integrated with it. I'll come to those services later. So it can be used essentially to filter traffic till layer 7, and contrary to network security groups, which only filters till layer 3. That is in a nutshell of Azure Firewall. So there's another feature which is actually built-in feature for Wvd, which is reverse connect. It is essentially an anti-RDP control, which reduces the risk involved with having remote desktops accessible from anywhere, as it uses a reverse proxy brokering service instead of a direct RDP connection, which makes it highly secure. So coming to the next slide, let's move to identity security. Wvd identity security. So how do we control the fact that we have got a service that is globally accessible from any device, anywhere, and still secure it when the users log in and ensure that those identities have not been compromised? How do we do that? So when thinking about Wvd security, there are several areas to keep in mind. Since Wvd spans technologies from the Azure infrastructure to the platform services and the user identities, and since it is accessible from any device anywhere in the world, and anyone can claim to be one of the users, right? So we need to be able to prove that they are who they claim to be, and those identities have not been compromised. So we may want to have different conditions in place that enable us to treat users differently. For example, if they are on a corporate network, or they're connecting from a VPN, or if they're accessing just from the internet directly, we don't know. So we can have conditions placed around those things. So a modern security perimeter extends beyond our known network to include the user identities. Thus, we need to secure them, right? So that when someone tries to log in to Wvd, they are appropriately challenged to prove their identities, and then they can be granted the requested access, obviously. So to secure the remote workforce, I'll just discuss two controls here, that is multi-factor authentication and conditional access. So multi-factor authentication is a control on Azure, as it's used for, I think it's available for everything now. So wherein we tie the user identity for username and password with some other kind of authentication to prove the identity multiple times. That is the whole idea. So the common one is the two-factor authentication, right? Multi means more than one. So what commonly it's two, but we can have more than that. So for Azure, the most common way to use multi-factor authentication is to use the Authenticator app on the mobile phone. So now coming to conditional access, the MFA really strikes when it is combined with this conditional access, wherein we set rules and policies in the organization that say when someone goes to log in, does he need to put MFA? For example, if the user is trying to log in from the corporate network, the MFA might not be required, right? So just an example. So it is to facilitate the ease of use, right, and to have a better experience. So now coming to conditions can be like risk factor of the device trying to connect. The device platform, maybe if it's coming from Linux, we don't have Linux machines, we should not allow it. Maybe the condition is location. It should only come from certain locations. Maybe the client app that's trying to connect. Maybe the device state, that is the security health of the client machine trying to access, so on and so forth. There can be other conditions. So additionally, we can send the access logs to Azure Log Analytics for investigations, and when required, or to other destinations. It can be sent to other destinations as well, like SIEM and so on and so forth. So let's go to session host security on the next slide. So this is a cloud layer security from Azure, where we can use Azure Policies, Security Center, and Azure Advisor, and further combine with some other Azure services. So Security Center spans across multiple layers of Azure, and it can be broken down essentially into three general pillars, which is policy and compliance. As Timothy was talking about compliances, how important it is, and how they were able to fulfill the requirement of one of their clients. The other pillar is resource security hygiene, and the other one is threat protection. So essentially, it helps to manage vulnerabilities, assess compliance with common frameworks like PCI DSS. It helps to strengthen the overall security of your environment. Each of these pillars can be discussed obviously at length, since they have a lot of capabilities and they have a lot of use cases, obviously. So coming to Azure Advisor, it works on the same principle as the Azure Security Center, but it covers more than just security. There are 5 major areas where Azure Advisor can advise us, and they're around cost, high availability, operational excellence, performance, and obviously security, which is what is it can be used for as well. So coming to Azure Monitor, it also works across many different areas, and we can monitor anything from the network to activity logs, performance metrics, Azure Service Health, and all the way down to the WVD and obviously each of their aspects. So one of the big tie-ins to the Azure Monitor is the Azure Log Analytics, wherein all the data across Azure is collected and can be processed to determine what is exactly going on, right? Azure Sentinel is an add-on for the Log Analytics itself that is specifically focused on security. It's going to take all the things that are going on with which Log Analytics is aware of and instantly be able to inform us about the current security posture of the environment. We can run threat hunting queries, workbooks to visualize the data, and in turn we can take some action, some proactive actions based on the findings of Azure Sentinel, right? So that makes it more secure, obviously, because we are protecting it in real time, right? So another thing that we can look into is the disk encryption. We can enable Azure disk encryption, obviously, to protect the operating system data disks from any confidentiality breach, and we can use Azure Key Vault. So one of the important things to encrypt here is the Fslogix profiles that are very important, because that is the personalized profile for each user, right? So that's where we might want to use it. So the next part of security is to ensure that the clients used to access the WVDs stay up to date, obviously, which comes under endpoint security. So there are numerous ways that we can secure the operating system, right? I'll just highlight some of them. So one is, say, for example, if there's a black screen, or lock it if the app or the remote desktop is idle for certain duration. This is dictated obviously by a group policy, which we can configure. We can also have a timer for screensaver maybe, and disconnect after certain duration. If screensaver is going on for certain duration, then just disconnect it. So if we consider users access to the remote desktop, we would recommend using the app locker, obviously, in group policies, which will restrict using certain applications from being run in the system based on the user groups, or other rules can be set as well. So it's ideally used for jump servers, wherein you only need the RDS tool, and thus we can only enable that app and block everything else, right? But we can apply it to anything else, pretty much everything else, not only to jump servers. So just to give you an idea how it works. So another control is to use the latest patches, obviously, and updates for the operating systems and the apps, which are integrated using the shared image gallery. So one more level is for obviously malware and virus protection. Of course, Windows Defender is by default enabled, but there is an advanced security control that can also be taken into consideration, wherein the Microsoft Defender Advanced Threat Protection can be used. Earlier, it was not available for Windows multi-session environment, but now it's available for those non-persistent machines as well. It essentially deploys an ATP instance and gives us an option to download the client for a respective operating system machine and install it there and connect it to the ATP server, wherein we can manage, monitor, and do pretty much everything remotely. So we can also automate the whole process by connecting with the ATP. So another thing we can do is, say, for example, we can enable just-in-time access with on-demand non-persistent WVDs using Fslogix profiles, which is in itself another security control, right? So there's a lot actually that can still be covered with respect to security for WVD environments, and say, for example, least privilege controls, multiple layers of security for defense in depth, threat intelligence, and other capabilities within Azure itself. So considering the time limitations, this should be enough to give you an overall idea of posturing and protection that can be achieved. And you can anyways get back to us anytime for further assistance. Our contact details will be shared later. So now I'll just pass it back to Mark to walk you through a brief demo of WVD. So back to you, Mark.
Thank you, Shahid. Before I finish the summary of WVD and take you through the demo, I see that we have a few really good questions. So one of the questions was someone was planning to add multiple users to the application group at a time. Is there someone to use how to use PowerShell loop to do that, right? So basically you'd use a PowerShell loop with the add RDS app group user command. I have attached the documentation just in case. And if you ever need any help with this, we can definitely help you. You can feel free to contact me at my email address that I have put down in the questions, right? Is it possible to have different users of Windows of WVD share content through a shared folder that is create in WVD, the equivalent of folder sharing between local machines, right? So in this case, again, it would be on the use case. So if a user is using a multi-session environment, it is possible. Even in a single environment, it is in a single user per VM environment, it is possible. But there are shared storage services like Azure Files available that would perfectly fit this use case at a more cost-efficient deployment, right? Is it possible to have WVD run behind the VPN? But WVD is working fine as a service right now. Right, like Shah did cover, it is possible to run WVD behind a VPN. It's like a point-to-site VPN between a client machine and the site on Azure. Right, Shah, this is more of a question for you. How does WVD handle ID security and network security? If you would like to cover that, Shahid.
Yeah, let me read the question. You're referring to, does WVD work with third-party MFA such as geosecurity? Is that what you're saying?
Yes, that is one. And the other one is how does WVD handle ID security and network security?
Okay, so as I've already, thrown some light on the ID security, we can have we can integrate it with any federated service as well, which is Windows federated service, and we can add another layer of security on this, which is MFA and conditional accesses. So the actual baseline identity security remains the same. The MFA and conditional access will complement those identity securities, which are already in place in the market, either from Microsoft or anywhere else. For WVD, it uses the Microsoft native identity access services. I hope that answers that question. And
right.
The other
so
one,
in relation to the one with Duo, Duo security is normally integrated with Azure AD. It's not integrated directly with WVD. And since WVD uses Azure AD and O365 to authenticate, as long as the integration is done with the Azure AD and O365, you should be able to use Duo as the MFA provider also.
you're right.
All right, so I'm just gonna let's just get back into the presentation, and all the other questions I will take towards the end of our session where we had the Q&A part of our session, right? So just to summarize some of the benefits that we've covered today. So the first and important one is the multi-session Windows 10 experience that you get from WVD, right? So being the only multi-session experience available for Windows 10 on the cloud out there, WVD gives you a more cost-effective deployment strategy for various organizations of various sizes. And it gives you the ability to scale this in this infrastructure to make sure that organizations don't feel the brunt of having a VDI infrastructure running on premise with the multi-session Windows 10 experience. Optimization for O365 apps, like I said, or applications like Teams and other O365 applications have been majorly tweaked for WVD. IT administrators can go ahead and virtualize single applications and give application-based access to users through the WVD console. That is, a user doesn't have to have a remote desktop assigned to them. They can go ahead and use these applications as virtualized applications too. The ability to easily migrate Windows Server remote desktops and applications to Azure. So when WVD gives you the ease to actually migrate all these applications to Azure, One of them being using tools that we as third-party integrators like Aspinex, partners of Microsoft, would really help you with. It's a really simple process where we help plan out capacity. So we take you through the whole TCO calculation phase, where we help you calculate the total cost of ownership between running it on premise or running it on Azure. Give you a use case that helps you support the whole deployment of your VDI infrastructure on Azure, and then help you migrate your VDI infrastructure if existing from your on-premise setup to Azure. Right, its ability to deploy and scale in minutes. So this I will be showing you in the demo, how simple it is to actually deploy the WVD service, assign a user, and log into the user. Right, and normally it would take like a few weeks to months to get a VDI infrastructure set up on premise, from your procurement phase to your setting up your racking and stacking, setting up of your licenses, setting up of software, making sure everything is working properly, troubleshooting. All of that would take a lot of time, right? So the ability to deploy and scale in minutes is a real big value add that Azure gives you from this platform as a service, right? Another important thing that I haven't covered is the supported transition from Windows 7 to Windows 10, right? So now, as many of you know, Windows 7 is actually going end of life. Right, by moving your Windows 7 workloads into WVD, Microsoft additionally gives you a 3-year additional Windows 7 security updates on your workload, and then helps you transition from that Windows 7 infrastructure into a Windows 10 infrastructure, giving you that flexibility of and giving you that support during your transition, also for your applications using the Microsoft Azure fast track service. Right. So I'm just going to break off over here and go ahead and share my screen for the demo. Right, so you can just have to go to portal.azure.com, log in. So I'm going to log in as my WVD administrator. My WVD can be accessed from anywhere in the console by just searching for Windows Virtual Desktop, clicking on Windows Virtual Desktop, and you get to the WVD console. So from the WVD console, I'm just going to go ahead and create a host pool, right? So the host pool will sit within your subscription and within your resource group. I'm going to go ahead and name my host pool. And the location you see over there, East US, is where your metadata for your WVD service is stored, right? Your WVD infrastructure won't necessarily run at that location. So I'm going to say that this is not going to be a validation environment, and I'm going to say that depending on my host pool type, right? So personal or pool. So personal would be where you would have one user per system, and pooled is where you would have multi-session type of environment for your users. I'm going to say my max session limit is going to be 3. That means in any particular VM, I'm going to have 3 users go in, right? So my load balancing algorithm, so that's my breadth first or depth first algorithm, right? So your breadth first is basically where it's more on a performance front, right? So it's your default go-to load balancing algorithm on Azure, where the load balancer will basically assign users to a VM that has the least amount of connections already to that VM, right? So that means you don't go ahead and over provision users on a smaller VM in any case, which can actually be avoided by using scaling automations, right? And your depth first load balancing is where a single VM is fully allocated to the maximum session limit, that is 3 in this case. So a VM would have 3 users before the load balancer goes ahead, uses the automation to spin up another VM in the back end and assign new users to that VM. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and leave it on breadth first and add my virtual machines to the host pool, right? So my virtual machines is basically what my WVD service runs on. So my virtual machines will hold all the users, and I'm going to deploy the virtual machines in Southeast Asia. Like Timothy was saying, right? So you have a range of choices for your VM size. You have a general purpose, you have a graphic intensive, you have various sizes available. I'm going to go ahead and leave it on my standard D2 V3 version of VM, and I'm going to say since this is a demo, I'm just going to leave it at 1 VM, but depending on the size, we can help you size the number of VMs actually required to run your WVD infrastructure in the backend. right? So your image, so this is where you would actually pick your multi session image. So you have a range of default images provided by Microsoft, but since my demo includes using Fslogix technology, I have gone ahead and created an image and stored it in my shared image gallery, right? So this is a multi-session Windows 10 environment that has Fslogix built into it. That means I load Fslogix containers every time I log into my system, right? So go ahead and deploy this. I'm going to go ahead and deploy this in a virtual network. Like Shad was talking about the network security groups available. You can go ahead with no security, or you can go ahead with advanced security where you can block each pin, each port. I'm going to go ahead and join this to my domain. Put in my credentials for just make sure that this user that you're using has the permissions to add systems to the domain, add objects to the domain, so that you can go ahead and add this particular VM to the domain too. Right, so I'm going to go ahead and deploy this in an application group, right? So I've already created an application group, but you can just create one by keying the name under the create new button. Add tags. I think it's very important that we add tags to all resources deployed on the cloud. This helps for a more compliant and governed infrastructure. Helps you keep tabs on what's being deployed, when it's being deployed, and what it's part of, right? So I'm going to go ahead and validate my infrastructure, and I'm going to hit create, right? So once I hit create, what happens is the dashboard is sending all of my application configurations to the backend and starts the deployment progress. Right. So at this point of time, you would go just walk away from the system, go grab a cup of coffee. 10 minutes later, you'd come back and done. So your deployment is complete, and that's how easy it is to deploy the Wvd infrastructures, right? So now I'm going to go to my resource and show you what's deployed. So what was deployed in the backend was my connection broker, my load balancer. That's all managed by AWS, but by Azure, sorry. But what I can see is my session host, right? My application group and my applications. So I'm going to go into my application group, and I'm going to go ahead and add my users, right? So like Timothy was saying, it's a user-based assignment. So I'm going to assignments, and I'm going to add my user. So first of all, I'm going to add my user itself. And I'm going to go ahead and add the Wvd admin also. So you can see that this particular, since it's pooled, it lets me add multiple users to the same application group, right? So just give it a few seconds while it refreshes and executes the command. Right. So you should the user should pop up here, right? So you see the assigned VMs are 0. That's because you haven't assigned a VM straight to them, and they're using more of a Wvd shared pool, right? So I'm going to go ahead and share my screen now, and what happens here is, now say that I have gone ahead and deployed my remote desktop, virtual desktop, right? So that's I recorded that a few days back. And you see the desktop is showing for me in my remote desktop client. This client is available for a lot of devices. It can be Mac OS, it can be Linux, it can be Android, it can be iOS and Windows. And keeping in mind the whole remote workforce and work from anywhere thing, you can actually also access your Wvd infrastructure from the browser, right? And depending on the organization's security policies, this conditional access can be also controlled based on trusted devices, etc. So I'm going to go ahead and log into my default desktop, right? So just go ahead and double click on my default desktop, and I'm going to key in my password. Right, key in my password, and a remote desktop will automatically log me into my default desktop. Now, what's happening in the backend is that my default desktop is going ahead and provisioning, attaching my user profile container from my file storage. Right, I'll show you my file storage in a second. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and customize this. Right, so what I have is I'm going to go ahead and take a customization. So as you can see, I'm going to go ahead and copy this wallpaper into my system. I'm going to go ahead and copy this into my And I'm going to set this as my default background, right? So this is something that's stored on your user data. Your background is stored on your user data. So what's happening is now I'm going to go ahead and disconnect. So what's happened is Wvd has gone and removed my user profile container from that particular VM. As you can see, so I'm going to switch to my file server, and in my file server you can see my profiles are stored here. This is my profile, and under my profile is my VHD file. So the VHD file is what actually contains the data about my profile. So every time I log in to my Wvd infrastructure, right? So double click, key in my password, connect. My user profile in a matter of seconds actually just being attached to it, right? You saw, right? So it takes that fast. It's just that fast how the user profile is attached in the backend through the robust Azure network, right? So Azure's network is so robust that it would just take a matter of seconds to hydrate all the user data in the backend into the VM, along with my applications and along with other various data that's part of my user data. So that's a small demo on the deployment and a small use case on Wvd with Fslogix. So let me just switch back to my presentation and let's complete that. All right.
Anirudh, we still have a few more questions in case you want to take them up, because we've almost run out on the time. Right. So would you like to do the questions first and then do the rest of the presentation? So
sure, yeah, let's do that.
Thanks,
Bhavika. Yeah. So okay. So Amazon Workspaces has an option called Trusted Devices, where you can upload a copy of your root CAs and you can configure this to allow connections from devices that have a certificate. It does not require, can you manage this, or for you to manage this device from an MDM or push your own certificate to this to work? So right, so you can do this with conditional access. Again, having an MDM does help you actually go ahead and make it easier for you to manage devices in case you're looking at that scale of device management. But yes, it can be done with various conditional access methods. Is there a way to automate the profile container registry setting entries required to redirect user profiles when you only use AADDS? The goal is not to have to log into every VM to make the registry change. Yes, there is a way to do this. Like we've done it. What we've done is created a shared image gallery where we store master images. So if you look at it from a whole administration process, what you would do is you would basically edit your image, store your image, and make sure that the image propagates to the other VMs every time it spins up, right? So any changes would be done on the image instead of being done on every single VM that's deployed using that image. Is there a best practice for registering apps like Adobe Creative Cloud where users install what they need through the application, multi-session, and personal? So yes, see, Adobe products are basically license held, right? So if you do have a licensing server, it would make it easier. There are a few best practices to follow when it comes to registering applications like this. We would definitely love to help you to get this up and running in case you do have this particular use case. One thing I would say is in a multi-session mode, you really have to adhere to Adobe's policies, licensing policies. Like Microsoft has their own licensing policies, Adobe also has their own licensing policy, and we would love to get in touch with the Adobe team to understand what is their licensing policy around running Wvd on running their applications on such a infrastructure where you have multi-sessions and environments happening. Right, which Windows workload is a good fit for Windows Virtual Desktop transformation? So if you have a VDI infrastructure on premise, or are you looking to set up a RDS or VDI infrastructure for your users, you have multiple users, and you're looking for a more cost-effective way to do this, that is a perfect use case for using Wvd as a service to help your VDI transformation. Right, which Windows Server 7 workload can be migrated to Windows 10 multi-user? So ideally, you would have to have something like Windows 10 Enterprise on-premise or Windows 7 Enterprise or licensing around that. Timothy, if you have anything around this, you can go ahead and answer the question. But at the moment, I do not know exactly which Windows 7 workload you might have to have on premise. I can go ahead and look into that. And if you could just drop us your email ID in the Q&A, we'd love to go ahead and look at this and come back to you on this. Which workloads? All right, so which VDI workloads are a good fit for Azure hosted WVD and which is a better fit for on-premise VDI? So if you look at it from a very specific use case, right? So if you look at a generalistic VDI infrastructure, I would say that's more of that would definitely be an Azure hosted WVD use case, right? But if you're looking at small specific use cases where users already have existing Horizon infrastructures on premise and you want to go hybrid cloud, then I would say maybe use the VMware management plane over VDI over WVD. So that gives you the ability to integrate your on-premise VDI infrastructure and your cloud VDI infrastructure. Or if you're looking at deploying very specific types of applications that are not supported on the cloud, that's when you would actually go on premise. But at the moment, I've never seen any application that's not actually gone onto the cloud. Is it supported by the MS365 E1 license? Timothy, can you answer that?
Yeah, working through the list of questions, Mark. Thanks.
Right. So, Timothy will just get back to you on the MS365 E1 licensing. Is not right there, but from the licensing list I do have, I remember it's MS365 E3 and above. So how does WVD compare to classic RDS environments? So basically a WVD environment is, you have to look at it from a more cloud perspective as a platform as a service compared to your classic RDS environments, and the ability to actually have multiple users on a Windows 10 environment is one of the benefits that you don't have on a classical RDS environment that is a benefit on the cloud. How to get the Windows Virtual Desktop remote desktop client for Windows Insider version. Right, so the desktop client is available for public download on the WVD website. You can go to aka.ms/WVD and you can go ahead and download the client from that particular site. How to change the default virtual desktop session desktop to a more friendly one with a PowerShell or GUI command. Right, so you can go ahead and do that. You can do that on the GUI by renaming your application group. Right, so my application group is named default desktop, so my default desktop goes ahead and gets the name from there, but you can go ahead and change it on your application group itself. Windows Virtual Desktop Image Management. How do you manage and deploy custom images, include versioning and Azure Shared Image Galleries? So that's a bit of a lengthy question to answer, but so there's a whole process of having your own images, right? So you can go ahead and upload your own images depending on the images you've created on premise, or you can go ahead and custom create your image on the cloud and store it in your shared image gallery. In your shared image gallery, it does have something called image definitions that helps you version which image you want to add to the gallery, and that helps you with the versioning of your images also. All right, I think I will get back. How to start OneDrive and automatically sign in when the remote app in Windows Virtual Desktop? I think that's a really good question. So one of the optimizations that Microsoft has done for the O365 applications is especially on OneDrive, right? So what happens is Fslogix actually holds the information to your OneDrive application. So the OneDrive, whenever your Fslogix container is actually attached in the backend, the OneDrive sync client automatically hydrates all the files that was on the Fslogix container, right? So all the files are automatically hydrated from your OneDrive storage into the VM that you're logging in. right? And this happens automatically at sign-in. You don't have to go ahead and automate it manually. This question is a little out of topic. How do you enroll Apple devices with iOS 13 user enrollment mode in Microsoft Intune? We would love to help you get through to that. We have a separate team that actually works on the whole MDM solutioning of Microsoft, that is Intune. So if you could just drop us your email ID, and we would love to get back to you on how you can achieve this. Right. IT only delivered about 80 of the 200 plus patches last month. How do you manage that type of change in the cloud when Microsoft manages patching and environment concerns? Right. So you do have the ability to control your own patching, right? On maybe see like on an image that you've created, you can go ahead and test these images, right? So remember, I created something. There was a option called validation environment and not a validation environment, right? So traditionally, what you would do is you would go ahead and test your patches out on your validation environment before you push it to public, right? So there is a small change in how you manage your infrastructure on the cloud to depend compared to how you manage your infrastructure on premise. Especially when it comes to patches, you have more services available on the cloud to automate your whole patching process also, like Shahid was telling you, right? So Azure has inbuilt services that helps you update patches on your virtual machines dynamically, or you can go ahead and manually test this out using your shared image gallery. In terms of SLAs, what do we get if the active directory goes down? Right. So this is so Azure does provide you high SLA on the AD. That's because Azure goes ahead and replicates your Active Directory in the backend. If your Active Directory does go down, I'm sure that the secondary Active Directory that's replicated in Azure will take over. In case both are down, Azure does have various processes in place to make sure that SLAs that they have defined in their SLAs in their contracts and agreements are met, and make sure that the customers don't have or downtime. What other things you can do is go ahead and deploy your Active Directory over various regions to actually help you keep that SLA higher, right? So if say you have an Active Directory in Singapore, you can use the same tenancy, go ahead and maybe replicate the Active Directory somewhere in the US, maybe East US, and then you'll have two copies of your Active Directory. So in case one goes down, it takes a matter of minutes to just switch from one Active Directory to the other. All right. I see a lot of questions coming in, so I don't think I'll be able to answer all of them at the moment, but we will. I see a lot of them say anonymous, so if you could just drop your name along with the questions and your email ID, so we can actually get back to you on this. But for now, I think I'll just go back into the presentation, just finish up the little bit that we have left. Right. So what I want to cover at the moment is more from a SpanX perspective, and that is the managed services that we provide. Right. So our managed services is broken down into 4 pillars. So our DevOps as a service, right? So our DevOps as a service is where we step into your whole application development process, and we take on the whole DevOps lifecycle. That's your configuration management, your CI, your CD, helping you build out pipelines, helping you manage your pipelines, making sure that microservices you're using are secure, updated, making sure that your code is secure. So services present in the cloud help you actually scan your code, right? So if you look at using microservices like Azure Functions or something like that, your build every time a function runs, and if you have unnecessary lines of code over there, you're just going to get built higher. So we help you actually cost optimize from that perspective also. Next would be our security as a service. Our security as a service is led by Shahid and his team. We have a dedicated security team that goes ahead and does their monthly, weekly, and quarterly and annually security assessments on your infrastructure, keeping in mind the best practices of the cloud, the various compliance standards that customer has to follow, and making sure that you adhere to those compliances, right? VAPT on your application, on your network, on your infrastructure, both internal and external VAPT is also done on timely basis. Security assessment and VAPT can be also leveraged as one-time engagements with Aspinex, right? So we can go ahead, we can come in, do an assessment, do a VAPT, give you the recommendations that we have from our side, and help you go ahead and fix all the flaws that we found with the infrastructure and the application, right? So that's something that would fall under our security as a service. Infrastructure and information security, right? So along if you look at the whole process of an organization that's continuously adding infrastructure to the cloud, how do you know that your data on the cloud is secure? How do you know the infrastructure you're building is secure, right? So our team continuously continuously manages the security of your infrastructure and information by continuously auditing how your infrastructure is deployed with regards to the best practices in the industry, and again, like with regards to the compliance that you have to follow. Application security. How do you know you've not written a piece of code into your application that's actually malicious, right? So that it has an open end that allows hackers and actors to come into your application and mess up whatever you've developed. So right, so applications code is scanned by our tools. So we have a few tools that we hook up into your environment, scan your application code, make sure that your code is secure from a development perspective also. SOC as a service. So our SOC as a service is where we onboard our customers into our SOC, and we go ahead and manage your security operations from a day-to-day perspective from our SOC and give you that as a service, right? So this allows you as a customer to focus on more business-driven opportunities and engagements inside within your organization, instead of worrying about the security aspect of it that Aspinex would take care of, right? Continuous audit. So continuous audit is a value add that we give to all of our customers when they sign up for our managed services, right? So security assessments, performance analysis, RI recommendations, cost optimizations, and reports, right? So if you take all of this into consideration, this really gives you a number to put against the money you're spending for your infrastructure on cloud, right? So you can say, okay, so I've spent this much, I've spent X on my cloud infrastructure. What has been my performance over the whole quarter, right? Have I been optimally using my VMs in the cloud? Is there any way to further cost optimize what I already have in the cloud, right? So this is a value add that we as Aspinex would give you. So along with this, we help you with sizing recommendations, right? Say you're deploying a new Wvd infrastructure, and we as a partner are already managing your Azure infrastructure, right? So what we help you actually size your Wvd infrastructure for your new deployment also. Next generation managed services is where we take on the whole infrastructure management, that is your VMs, your patching, designing and automation of deployments, infrastructure management, that is your change requests and your service requests, etc. Infrastructure as code, so helping you automate and successfully deploy infrastructure without the need of human intervention by making sure that your infrastructure is deployed with code, right? So that way you don't have to you won't have issues when you go into a deployment lifecycle. Request management, that again comes under our service requests and our change request management, and continuous cost optimization, which falls under our continuous audit vertical, right? So I'm just going to head back into the question and answers. Thank you, Timothy, for answering a lot of the questions. All right, so yeah, scroll down, and all right, a lot of them is on Microsoft endpoint management. Like I said, we do have a separate team that works on the endpoint management perspective, and we'd be really happy to help you get on answer or get all these questions answered from an endpoint management perspective. how do you configure Windows Autopilot with white glove deployment? Like I said, that's a little more of a niche question that's not exactly relevant to WVD at the moment. So I would love for you to just go ahead and send me this question on a one-to-one mail, and I will love to get back to you. And I will also make sure that this goes on to our blog on aspirenext.com so more people have access to this information. All right, I think I've answered most of the questions. If I have, if I haven't, I'm really sorry. I would love to, if you would just send them to us. You can send them to sales@aspirenext.com, or you can send it directly to me, anirudh.mark@aspirenext.com, and we would definitely get back to you on your questions. All right, thanks everyone. I'm going to hand it back to Bhavika. Thanks for attending the session and being such a wonderful audience.
Thank you, Timothy, and thank you, Mark. We see that all our attendees have still stayed on the call, though we ran out of time. So thank you each and every one of you. We've said to drop us an email on sales@aspirenext.com. And also, like I mentioned on the chat window, we are running special offers and promotions. We can also do a deep dive on your specific organizational requirements, and Mark will be happy to engage on a one-on-one. So please do drop us that email. And signing off, and thank you very much from me, Bhavika Thakkar at Aspire Next. So thank you everybody, and enjoy the rest of your day. Thank you.